For as good as Ohio State fans felt at this point exactly 7 days ago, I think Ohio State football fans feel just about that bad right now. Things change considerably in college football in just 1 week. An exhilarating comeback win at home against Penn State 39-38 against what was supposed to be the other best team in the Big Ten, and Ohio State looked to be in the clear by many. I certainly didn't say it all week. I was talking about difficult games against Iowa, Michigan State, and Michigan for the Buckeyes, but many thought Ohio State was in the clear to get to the Big Ten championship game and even win that one easily over Wisconsin. All right. Iowa thought differently. 55-24. So this was no fluke. This was no manner in which they almost beat Penn State. That would have been a credited win as well, but they had a lot of smoke and mirrors in that game, a lot of coverages, really a lot of stops in the red zone, and almost pulled it out 21-19 final. But this one was a butt kicking across the board. Iowa's offensive line with 2 freshman tackles up against what's considered to be the best defensive line in the country, maybe no more. Yes, Nick Bosa was ousted from the game due to a targeting and a legitimate targeting penalty called against him in the second quarter. So Ohio State was missing its best pass rusher, but that defensive line is loaded with pass rushers. So if there was any unit on the field that could afford a loss of Bosa's quality, it was Ohio State's defensive line, or so many of us thought. Iowa was just a tremendous team on this day at home. They came out with the all black, and they blacked out any Ohio State chance of getting to the college football playoff. 55-24. Can you believe it? Now, I said earlier today that one of the dumbest lines that I've seen out of Vegas this year was Iowa plus 20 or 21. Running with that one, definitely. But the outright win, and by 31 points, dominant in the second half, this was some kind of game by the Hawkeyes. It started with the Amani Hooker interception of J.T. Barrett on the first play from scrimmage, 7-0 Iowa. Ohio State came right back. J.T. Barrett looked just as sharp. It's right in my notes. Through about a quarter and a half, he looked just as sharp as he did last week. He had some tremendous throws on the second drive of the game to K.J. Hill and the touchdown tying score to Terry McLaurin. It was stated by Brian Greasy at some point in the game, why is Ohio State not throwing the ball downfield when they have a decided speed advantage, especially with Johnny Dixon going downfield, but also with McLaurin, K.J. Hill, more of a shifty underneath guy. But they didn't do it. So Ohio State gets to the end zone at 7-7. They actually, with Blake Hawkeye, were able to kick the ball into the end zone. So Ohio State corrected that issue from last week and previous weeks, where the kickoff coverage and the kicking itself on the kickoff team was atrocious. Hawkeye kicked it into the end zone on regularity, but it was the Ohio State defense trying to stop Nathan Stanley and company, which proved elusive in this one. Benjamin Victor had a drop in the back of the end zone that would have put Ohio State in the lead in the second quarter. He dropped it in the back of the end zone. The Buckeyes had to kick the field goal. It was 10-10. The teams traded touchdowns, Iowa going up 17-10 when Noah Fant took the defense with him, and Nathan Stanley threw the touchdown pass on that play to make it 17-10. Iowa came in with the 4th worst red zone offense in the country. Not on this day. 55 points against Ohio State. And Noah Fant, I wanted to check his numbers on the day. Yeah, he was big on the day despite not catching a whole lot of passes. 4 catches for 54 yards for him. And also the touchdown reception by TJ Hawkinson, that was where he benefited from Fant taking out the 2 Ohio State defenders. 5 catches for 71 yards and 2 touchdowns for Hawkinson. So the Buckeyes came back. They made it 17-all. JT up top to Johnny Dixon, a play that we did not see attempted again in terms of a just straight post pattern where Johnny Dixon burned the Iowa defense, and it was 17-all. Jamarco Jones, Demetrius Knox nixed up nicked up for Ohio State, but they only missed about 5 or 6 plays each, so no issue there for the Buckeyes. As we mentioned, Bosa out with targeting. Josh Jackson had 2 remarkable interceptions, especially the second one you will see plastered all over the internet, Sports Center, etc., for the rest of the college football season. A one-handed grab that pretty much just iced the game, even if it was totally out of hand at that point. This was a Nathan Stanley directing the Iowa offense to the tune of Stanley's numbers on this day probably won't even tell the whole story. He was 20 of 31 for 216 yards. He did have 5 touchdown passes and no interceptions. So from a yardage or completion percentage standpoint, Nathan Stanley was nothing special. Had to watch the game. He was exceptional throwing on the run. Freshman quarterback for Iowa. Look out Big Ten, and it's certainly the Big Ten Western Division over the next few years. Akram Wadley got loose a number of times. He had 118 yards on 20 carries. James Butler, 10 carries for 74 yards as Iowa, even with the sacks included, and there were very few by Ohio State. I believe only 2 sacks on this game. The rushing attack for Iowa, 243 yards, 6.4 yards per carry against the Ohio State defense that many of us, including myself, thought it was one of the top 5 in the nation. Maybe this was just an awful game and a great Iowa game plan, but it doesn't look like a top 5 offense at this point. Play of the game, possibly not necessarily from the standpoint of it making a difference, just as kind of a flag planting in the middle of a block O of sorts, was the what you could call a fake field goal. Now they got out of field goal formation and they went to the odd formation. So Kirk Ferentz getting out of his conservative mode and letting it all loose against this Ohio State team in trying to pull off the upset, and that they did. So Iowa lined up for a field goal on 4th and short, but then they motioned out into a bunch formation on the left with the limited line play with just the snapper and one other player along the offensive line. Ohio State not covering the snap. And so the long snapper on the play actually leaked out for the pass reception down inside the 3-yard line. And Iowa just fooled and just beat up Ohio State all day in this one. Another particular play in which Ohio State was, when I say only down by 3 scores, when it was still conceivable that they could come back at the beginning of the 4th quarter when it was, or late in the 3rd at 38-17. Yet after 3 consecutive 3-and-outs of the Iowa defense doing a remarkable job, JT went up top to Terry McLaurin, who had beaten the defender. I mentioned earlier that it took him forever to get back to this, but McLaurin beat the defense. JT underthrew it, and also McLaurin went up for the football, should have brought it in, and dropped it. The Iowa defensive line, and we talked about this a number of times this week, in likening this game to the Penn State game, this defensive line doesn't get a ton of quarterback hurries or sacks, so you're not going to see them on the stat sheet throwing the quarterback down for losses. But what they do is with A.J. Epinesa, with Matt Nelson, Anthony Nelson, not related from what I understand, the Nelson boys, and Epinesa, is they bat the football down. So they made life miserable on Barrett today. There were a number of times that you could see from the end zone shot that he had receivers open. He was making the right decision and most likely going to deliver the ball for a first down. And either Epinesa or one of the Nelsons batted the ball back in his face. Ohio State, Michigan State. That's the game in Columbus. If you're focused and paralyzed by the college football playoff, the game doesn't mean a whole lot because Ohio State's played itself out of it, not just by losing this game, but in the manner that Ohio State lost this game, getting destroyed by a good Iowa team, but certainly not a team that is going to be high in the rankings, maybe not even in the rankings despite this win. But Ohio State, Michigan State, at this point, at least in the season, is going to determine the Big Ten Eastern Division. With Michigan State knocking out Penn State, we'll have instant analysis that won't be so instant on Michigan State and Penn State in a few minutes. Buckeyes, Michigan State, and Columbus. Sparty has been in the thorn of the side of Urban Meyer a number of times during his stay in Columbus. Both teams are 5-1 in the Big Ten. Iowa goes to Wisconsin to possibly wreck the Badgers season. Iowa 6-3 overall at undefeated Wisconsin next week in Madison. My thoughts on Ohio State and Wisconsin, or the Iowa Hawkeyes. The future looks great for Iowa football, considering Nathan Stanley in place at quarterback. He has improved game by game, and he showed us what he could do in a crucial situation, difficult circumstances. One of the best defenses in the country, maybe overrated, but still, from a talent perspective, one of the best defenses in the country, playing extremely well, as he did in a different manner against Penn State. For Ohio State, more flaws exposed. JT Barrett playing out of his mind against Penn State, playing not so well in this one with 4 picks. Ohio State out of the college football playoff, and Iowa looking toward big wins down the stretch to put themselves in better bowl position. Let's discuss it right here on Mark Rogers TV.